Welcome to this episode of our program Daily Debate, and tonight we'll be speaking about the Egyptian foreign policy. This time from other perspective. We'll be recalling the glorious days since we're approaching the 30th of June. This revolution that has changed the course of Egypt dramatically. We'll be speaking or focusing today about the Egyptian foreign policy 8 years since the 30th of June revolution. We'll be speaking of how it has reflected a sincere political will to keep the Egyptian foreign policy on a balanced track, to preserve the Egyptian relations with all the big powers, with all the nations surroundings, the return of Egypt to the heart of several arenas. We're speaking about the return of Egypt to Africa, the return of Egypt to its role in maintaining and preserving the Arab national security and stability, the return of Egypt into the middle of all developments that are occurring. Since President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi assumed office on June the 8th, 2014, the Egyptian foreign policy succeeded in achieving new starts, new partnerships, new strategic alliances, and new relations that is based on a constant basis, which is mutual respect, non-interference in other domestic affairs, mutual interests or interests of everyone at the same level, and at the same time has given great impetus to such a revolution. We'll be highlighting this issue tonight. Before we delve into our discussion, let me here welcome our distinguished guests, Dr. Sharif Amir, the Professor of International Relations, and we thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start with our discussion, let's first have this quick report and 8 years of balanced Egyptian foreign policy. Let's watch.
The last 8 years after the 30th of June revolution has reflected the sincere political will to keep the Egyptian foreign policy on a balanced track that preserves Egyptian relations and priorities with the world nations. June 30th revolution was not just a popular uprising, but rather it was a change in the path of a glorious nation with a unique history, civilization, and a great position among other nations. Since President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi assumed office on June 8th of 2014, the Egyptian foreign policy succeeded in achieving a new start on various domains. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said that Cairo's foreign policy is primarily focusing on safeguarding its own interests and national security. He added that Egypt faced several challenges in 2013 and 2014, as there was a transitional government working on restoring Egypt's stability and institutions and implementing a political roadmap. Egypt has succeeded in obtaining a non-permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council, assuming the chairmanship of the United Nations Security Council Counter-Terrorism Committee, assuming chairmanship of the Arab Summit, combining membership of the African Peace and Security Council and chairmanship of the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, assuming the chairmanship of the African Union. Egypt is also keen on strengthening deep ties with other countries, whether with the brotherly Arab and African nations or with the major powers led by the United States, Europe and Japan, in addition to openness to other powers such as Russia and China. Accordingly, President al-Sisi paid foreign visits and participated in the regional and international summits and forums for the interests of Egypt politically and economically. In this context, Egypt adopted firm stances, especially towards the regional issues in the Middle East, topped by the crises in Syria, Libya, Yemen and Iraq. The Egyptian affiliation to the African continent is a top priority of the Egyptian foreign policy. Egypt has aimed to play an active role in various mechanisms of joint African actions through stimulating cooperation between Egypt and African brothers in all fields. The matter which was shown by paying many visits and welcoming the Africans officials in Egypt. However, such visit witnessed the signing of many bilateral agreements between Egypt and African countries in order to support cooperation and mutual interests. Relations between Egypt and its partners in Asia also witnessed a great momentum based on joint cooperation in various fields. This fact was embodied in the Asian tours and visits paid by President Sisi to Singapore, China, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Japan, South Korea and Vietnam. These visits aim to exchange experiences and expertise in the fields of development, education, industry and investments, where they resulted in the signing of several agreements and memoranda of understanding in these areas. The Egyptian-European relations also witnessed strong momentum at the bilateral level through President Sisi's visits to Germany, Italy, Britain, France, Russia, Hungary, Portugal, or at the multilateral level, including the mechanism of tripartite cooperation with Greece and Cyprus, or the development of relations up to the level of partnership with the countries of Visegrad through Egypt's first participation in the Visegrad Group Summit. The Egyptian-American relation witnessed significant development, where the Egyptian-American coordination represents an important part in the strategy of cooperation in issues of mutual interest. 8 years after President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi assumed leadership of Egypt, the Egyptian diplomacy sustains its efforts for advancement of the nation and protection of its interests.